someone asks you to explain that on paper. So whatever framework we developed until last lecture, let's try to put it in pictorial representation. Okay, and you can use same to explain in your interviews. So your test case is something which will be in the middle. Okay, and your test case will have all the steps to execute, right? And these steps we need locators. And for locators, we are relying on page objects, isn't it? So you can show like this. This is page object. This is another page. This is another page. All these are the three page objects where you are using to pull up the locators for your test. Okay. If your application have 10 pages, then you have 10 page locators. Let me write it as page object, and this is your test case. Great. And now on top of this page object, we also realized that there is one abstract class we have where it takes care of all reusable stuff, right? Now wait for page to visible or go to cart page, header section, footer section, and anything if you think that these page object classes can reuse the code. Now if there is any 4 lines of code which you think you can reuse in P1 class, P2 class, P3 class, then you can just make sure that that is driven from one common class which is abstract component, and all your classes inherits from abstract component. So this is how you are maintaining common objects of all page objects to an abstract component. You can explain this part very clearly that we are not duplicating the code in the files with the help of this. Good. Next, and you write a test cases. Even test cases, let's say this is one test case 2, and this is test case 3, right? Now, even these test cases need some common code like initializing the browser, closing the browser, and selecting the browser to execute. All that information needs to be reused in each and every test. But this common code to reuse, we are having base test as another class where we declare all the common code which belongs to all these test cases. And again, we were using inheritance concept here. So all these classes will extend this parent class and use the reusable utility. Okay. So our page object utilities uses abstract, and our test cases uses base test as a parent and segregate all the common code. This is something you have to clearly explain. Next. So you write a test cases, you take a page object, and your test needs data from where it is coming. So data is something coming from JSON files, right? And before it reaches your test, middle we have a parser. In the base test, we wrote a parser called get data to JSON, right? So that method basically reads your JSON file, converts it into hash map, and our test cases use that hash map. And here we have something called data provider for each and every test. Okay, so basically your JSON files will be read by this method, and hash map will be received by data provider, and then data provider sends data for you by utilizing it. Okay, maybe you can remove this arrow. So this goes to like this, and finally it feeded to test. So this is how you are sending the data to your test. Now, capturing screenshots, all that are externally taken care by listeners, right? So in listeners, you have like before test and after test success, after test failure. You have a lot of things here, right? So all your tests will start their journey from the listener's only, isn't it? First, it executes code in the listener that create one entry for extent report, and then it goes to the test. So extent reporting is something, right? HTML report is getting generated with the help of these listeners, right? Because every test, when it is trying to execute, first it will come here, listeners, and execute a method where it creates entry to extend report, and then go and execute it. Once the execution is done, again it come back to the listeners, and then say test fail or pass, and send that entry to extend report. So we are using listeners as a middleware between our extend reporting and testing. So once execution is done, the results are reported here. From here, it goes to this point. Okay, so this is how we handle extend reports. So what else we have? We have seen data reporting, and then we also have a retry listener. I'll still write this inside only because all comes under retry listeners family. And finally, we have something called XML files, which are test runners. These are important, right? So these will decide which test runner 1, test runner 2, test runner 3. These will decide which test to execute. Okay? So first you will trigger these tests, and what happens is uh, these will XML files will see what test needs to be executed, and then it gets connected to your test block. All this is the test cases, right? And your XMLs is what we trigger. How we trigger our XMLs? We trigger it from our form.xml file here, where we provide entries for those test engine XML in terms of profiles. Okay, and here is your terminal where you provide maven command. So execution starts from here. You run your Maven command. It will go to pom.xml, see which profile this guy is asking to execute, and that particular profile XML will be triggered. And in that XML, all the information will be there on which test to execute. So it will go here. And while executing test cases, it needs page object, so it goes to page object, gets it. And page object, if it needs any reusable thing, then they go to abstract. And again, it depends on base test to set up configurations for your test to run. And if it needs data, then it goes to JSON files. Okay, it connects to JSON files and then go to base test and do data provider hash map, and finally test will be fed. And while process of execution, it reports everything to listeners, and listeners report to extend HTML reporting. Okay, this is what our entire framework is doing. And top over it, if you use any Cucumber feature files as a wrapper, then you can still have another wrapper here as a feature files and explain them that step definitions, same thing you can repeat it here. But overall, this is the architecture, and if you explain in this manner, I'm sure people will definitely interest. And you can talk more about it. That here we are using interfaces, so implements, right? Here we are using interfaces. Here we are using inheritance, and you can drive all that explanation, right? And also, thread local group is something we are using inside listeners to achieve parallel execution. We can even talk about that also, like thread local group. Perfect. This concludes your framework explanation.